We are just honored to have him here to ourselves, and so he's going to do his presentation, then maybe field a few questions for us, if possible. And let's give it up for Mr. Brian Gordon.
I can tell you that he's got a great product also called Sales Track.
That's
So
him.
if you- That's him, so.
That's good. Do we need the microphone or do we not need the microphone? We don't need a microphone.
No, you need it.
We need it.
Yes.
Yeah,
We need
they're
it.
hard to hear back here.
Can you hear me in the back? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for the nice comments. I gotta take you guys around with me wherever I go. That'd be great. Appreciate that very much. Thank you for having me here today. I was asked by Nat Hodgson. He's the CEO of the Southern Nevada Home Builders Association. I don't know if you all know Nat. He was supposed to be here talking to you about the new home market. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but I'm also going to talk to you about what's happening in the economy here in Southern Nevada so that all of these great leaders in the realtor business know where things are headed. I'm guessing you all have a pretty good sense of things yourself. And so I'll share what I have in terms of our sort of outlook for the local economy and what we're expecting for the housing market specifically. So I've got a few different topics I want to talk about. You see them on the screen: supply chain. We want to look at what's happening in terms of people's wealth. That's pretty important to the housing market, right? How much money people have. The job market. What are the economic opportunities for folks here in Southern Nevada, and what does that mean in terms of potential demand in the housing market? And so I'll talk through that a little bit about the tourism industry and what's happening here. That's a critical element of our local economy. About a third of our jobs in Southern Nevada are tied to the tourism industry, typically in a pre-COVID environment. And so we'll talk about what's happening there as well as what's on the horizon for the housing market. And so all of that you guys will understand very clearly and have a pretty good sense of what's happening there. So I'll start off with the supply chain. I think back to where we were in March of 2020. I know you guys all remember that important month in our history, right? And what was happening in March of 2020. We had this little thing called COVID-19 that all of a sudden hit the world. And we really started to understand what the supply chain meant. What it meant when demand was exceeding supply and it was tough to get things. And there's this sort of image that you have in your mind of where we were at that particular point in time. You were scrambling and going to the grocery store and you could not find toilet paper. Remember that day? You were like, there's no toilet paper on the shelves. What is this COVID-19 thing doing? Why does everybody need toilet paper? Does it make you really sick and you need a lot of toilet paper? I don't know, but I better start buying it, right? So that's what happened at the outset of COVID-19. But the reason I bring this up is this is when we all started to realize what it meant from a supply chain standpoint. We can't get enough goods into grocery stores and things that we need to get our hands on. This was a pretty important one that we all thought was really important, and now we all have closets full of toilet paper in our houses, right? Sort of is what happened. And anyway, it happened with other things like food and other sorts of things, but I just love talking about toilet paper because I think it's funny. And then we had all these factories closing down around the world, right? So supply constraints started to kick in. We stopped building things. We stopped making things. We weren't manufacturing as much as we were. And so we had this imbalance in terms of supply and demand. And overall, the supply chain sort of felt this crunch, and it created a lot of problems for us. And you look at global trade, we saw that start to dip down in 2020. A lot of slowdowns in the overall economy. And again, this started to have an effect globally, nationally, and including what happened here in Southern Nevada. So this is a great picture of a big cargo ship. This is the Ever Given. This is a cargo ship operated by Evergreen, the company that operates a number of these around the world. Back in March of 2021, I don't know if you all remember this day, but this thing's holding 20,000 cargo ships on it. That's a lot, right? You look at the size of this particular vessel, this thing is 4 football fields long. Pretty big ship, right? Fits on a screen, I don't know, it's really hard to gauge the size of this thing, but this is what it looks like when you turn 4 football fields sideways in the Suez Canal. This was March of 2021, and so what happened at this point in time, we saw global trade really take a hit. This halted about $10 billion worth of global trade every day. That equated to about $7 million worth of trade every minute of the day while they were dredging this thing out of the Suez Canal. Probably more important than these 6 days was the fact that we had cargo ships that were trying to get around the world to get those containers into the hands of people that needed them. We need to either deliver those goods, or we need to deliver empty containers back to the places where we could load them up and bring them back again to keep this cycle going. So you get the idea. We really started to feel a crunch again in terms of supply chains and what that meant for us here in the United States. And then this is the port outside of Long Beach and Los Angeles out in Southern California. So we started having all of these ships sitting out in the Pacific Ocean, sort of giving you a little bit of a history lesson here, but it's really important for the economy. When you think about what was sitting out here, about 40% of all of the goods that come to the United States comes through Southern California's ports. And so all of those goods come through there, and you saw all these ships sitting out in the Pacific Ocean as we had this long delay. And these were the delays in terms of the number of days, in terms of how long ships were sitting out at sea. And when you started to see ships sitting out there for more than 25 days, dramatically higher than where we were pre-pandemic, where it was only a couple of days before they could sort of dock and drop their goods and then take off again. And so you get the idea. This long delay started to create more of a crunch, even up through December. Fortunately, we've started to see those climb back, and we've seen shorter delays overall, but you get the idea. There was a lot of delays coming through there. And how much did that delay mean? And if we took a look at how many ships were sitting out there in December, we had about 96 ships. Each one of those ships had about 7,000 different containers sitting on them. We had over $30 billion worth of goods that were just parked out in the Pacific Ocean waiting to get to places where they needed to go. And I think this is the most sort of poignant example of what these supply constraints meant for all of us. These are Ford trucks. These are sitting out in a parking lot at the Kentucky Speedway. And so for Ford Motor Company, they had these little microchips that weren't being manufactured as quickly, they weren't getting it delivered as quickly, and so they had to park all of these vehicles out in a big, massive parking lot while they waited for these little microchips. So I don't know if anyone's bought a car recently or a big truck or anything like that. These things were parked out there and just waiting to be have those microchips installed. And so again, these were the types of things that were impacting the supply chain, sort of impacted all of us at some level, right? And then we saw shipping costs start to go through the roof across the board, global shipping costs, local shipping costs or domestic shipping costs, whether it was by freight or by air. We were seeing all sorts of increases in costs, which sort of brings me back to this time in 1982. And why was 1982 important? Well, one, here's how much the cost of a new home was in 1982, right? $69,000, pretty amazing. Anybody that was driving around their old Honda Civic back in those days? Everybody I think is too young in here anyway, so nice pretty Honda Civic. You can kind of cruise. Oh, look at JC over there. He's like, yep, I had one of those. Loved it, right? Gallon of gas, 90 cents a gallon back in 1982. Why is 1982 really important? So this is inflation. This is the point I'm trying to make, is that we now have inflation that's over 7%. So you guys are going out, you're buying things, you're seeing the costs of goods are a lot higher, right? Prices are rising, and we haven't seen this level of inflation in over 40 years. It's been 40 years since we've seen this sort of peak level of overall inflation. Obviously, the Fed is doing things to try and address this. You're seeing them adjust monetary policy, all those sorts of things to try and cure the pitfalls that we're all facing in terms of the supply chain, but also in terms of inflation. And where are we seeing inflation? We're seeing it across the board in almost every category where we spend money. And so again, no surprises here, right? So as long as you don't drive a car, you don't turn the lights on, don't eat, buy groceries, any of that, you're just fine. Don't worry about it. Inflation's not hitting you at all, right? We're seeing it across the board. Obviously, prices are up everywhere, and we're all feeling the pain just a little bit. It kind of sets the stage in terms of the what we're seeing in terms of the consumer and how all of that relates to the consumer. Prices are up. At the same time, we're seeing wealth is up. Seems kind of weird, right? We're in a pandemic for 2 years, but we're seeing a lot of this new wealth and equity that's been built in the market, and you got the idea of where it's coming from, right? Newfound wealth. We're seeing incomes are up. We're seeing the stock market is up. We're seeing the housing market is up all over this sort of 2-year window, and we'll do a little bit of a deeper dive here. This is overall personal incomes in the state of Nevada. We added over $30 billion worth of additional income, incremental incomes for Nevadans during the last couple of years. We had things like the CARES Act. Anybody get a stimulus check? Maybe not all of you, some of us got a stimulus check from that. Some folks got stimulus payments for other reasons. The American Rescue Plan. We had a lot of supplemental unemployment benefits that were flowing through the economy, and so Nevada was getting a lot of that money. That went into people's wallets, and so we had a lot more income flowing through the local economy, and so that translates into a lot of additional consumer spending. Then we also know that wages are up pretty significantly. We're seeing them up and across a number of industries here in Southern Nevada. You get the idea: leisure, hospitality, retail trade, all those sorts of sectors that are seeing an upward lift in wages as a result of this tight labor market that we'll talk a little bit more about. But this is really, I think, an important statistic. $27 trillion worth of newfound wealth for folks across the entire United States. That includes Nevada, and so Nevada got their fair share of all this upward gain. So if you had money in the stock market, you saw the stock market skyrocket post-pandemic. It's been a little weird the last 4 or 5 weeks, so I get it. But then we also saw the housing market. You all know very well what's happening in the housing market. You saw these income levels up. The idea is that the point being, we've seen a lot of gains in terms of people's wealth right here in Southern Nevada. And so that has us all sort of operating a little bit differently than we normally would. And so stock market's up, the housing market is up. We looked at all the assessor data files here in Southern Nevada, and we said, who owned a house 2 years ago? Who owns a house today? And we counted all of those values and saw how far it was up. We've added about $23 billion worth of equity for people that own homes here in Southern Nevada. I mean, that's a crazy amount of money, right? Think back, for those of you that were here in like 2004, 2005, 2006, right? The housing market was skyrocketing. People were using their houses like ATM machines, pulling money out of there, going to the casino, buying boats and cars and all kinds of crazy stuff. A lot of that newfound wealth flowing through the economy now. And so all of that's translated into more consumer spending. People are spending money like crazy. We're seeing it more on goods than we were services. At least it's growing more in the goods category because everybody went online during COVID-19. We weren't going out as much for service-related spending, so you saw a lot of goods being purchased online, and that's sort of created a little bit of a shift in terms of the overall consumer spending profile. And we look at taxable retail sales in Southern Nevada. We track how much consumer spending is taking place, and this is great for state and local governments, right? They're getting more tax revenue. But we're at an all-time high, over $50 billion worth of spending taking place during the past 12 months here in Southern Nevada. You see the dip during COVID-19, you see it coming back as we've now started this recovery curve, but we are up nearly 14% in terms of the overall amount of spending going on in the local economy. Most everything is up except for your bars and restaurants. They're sort of getting back to where we were pre-pandemic, a little bit of ways to go there, but we're starting to get back. Cars, I mentioned that. We see car prices are through the roof, both new and resale cars, and the volume is also up. So you're seeing a lot of cars out there that don't have their license plates yet, right? People are buying cars like crazy right now because they've got all this newfound wealth, and so they're buying big ticket items like vehicles and all sorts of stuff. Online retailers, this is the one I like because it sort of accelerated this idea of Amazons of the world and buying things online, right? We were all sort of doing a little bit of it, but once the pandemic hit, everybody was buying stuff online. I like to tell the story about my mother who called me sometime in April of 2020. She says, I've got to run out to the store to get something. I don't even remember what it was. I said, why don't you just get it online? She says, I get it at the store. I said, there's like an online store. She couldn't grasp this whole concept. She created an Amazon account. I don't think she's left the house since. That's what that may be my mother's spending, right? 172% online, almost $4 billion of online sales activity in the last 12 months. So you get the idea. The other thing that I think is important to talk about is what's happening in the job market. Obviously, jobs are important to what happens here in the overall economy. It's important what's happening in our leisure and hospitality industry. It's important as to what's happening for opportunities for people to buy homes, which is near and dear to all of our hearts. But we get this question all the time. We have employers that call us up, or our clients, and they're trying to figure this whole thing out, and they say, where did all the workers go? Where did the workers go? We've lost all these jobs, but somehow we can't find anybody to work for us. I mean, how does this work? We had almost 300,000 people in Las Vegas got laid off overnight. April 2020, May 2020, we lost almost 300,000 jobs because we shut down the biggest industry that we have. We shut down casinos for 78 days. A lot of people lost their jobs. Now we've started to come back. So this is where we're at in terms of the Southern Nevada economy. And what I'm going to show you here is on the far left, you think back to February of 2020, right before sort of the pandemic really took hold, how many jobs did we have? And this is just in percentage terms. And then how many jobs did we lose? We lost almost 30% of our employment base, and now we've started to climb back. We're sort of getting back to where we were. So this is the terminology that I like to use, the recovery curve. This is how we're sort of getting back to zero where we were pre-pandemic. We're not there yet, right? So we're down about 58,000 jobs in the Las Vegas area from where we were pre-pandemic. A lot of jobs, a lot of people have lost their positions, and those are gone. And we're slowly seeing them come back, but on the net, we're off about 58,000 jobs in Las Vegas. That's a big number, right? But some industries are doing really well. We're seeing growth in some of these industries. This particular one, 26,000 more jobs than we had leading into COVID-19. These are really like your retailers, these are your wholesalers. So these are the Amazons of the world. These are your retail shops. So people started bringing them back quicker, and that's why you're seeing more jobs in this particular sector than we did pre-pandemic. Really, my mother is driving a lot of that demand in those job categories, I guess. Education and health services, I think we would be ahead of where we were pre-pandemic if we could find more doctors, more nurses. We're just short-staffed, right? I don't think we have enough capacity there, so we're seeing pretty much flat with where we were before. And then you think about professional and business services. Those jobs have not all come back yet, and so we're waiting to sort of see that recovery, but you see it's bouncing around and getting close to where we once were. Government positions are still off. The government sector is a little bit slower to respond, so we haven't seen those jobs come back quite as quickly. And then you have things like construction. You think back during the pandemic, we had a couple of major projects that wrapped up construction. Some place called Allegiant Stadium. I don't know, have you ever heard of that one? Resorts World Las Vegas, right? Those projects wrapped up construction. You had a lot of construction workers at those jobs. Unless they have another job to go to, you can see those numbers start to pull back a little bit. But from a residential construction standpoint, I think the builders would argue that they can't find enough workers. So these numbers could certainly be up quicker if they could find qualified labor to build homes here in Southern Nevada. So we're still off of where we were. This is the big one. The leisure and hospitality industry. So we are off 62,000 jobs from where we were pre-pandemic. That's a massive number. I told you that all jobs on the net are off about 58,000. So more than that is still has not recovered in the leisure and hospitality industry. We've seen gains in other areas that are offsetting that, but this is a big number. And I can tell you right now, not all of these jobs are coming back. Leisure and hospitality companies, hotel casino operators, they are investing in technology. They're trying to find ways to do more with less. And I don't know if many or any of you are really, into the all-you-can-eat buffet. But I don't see a lot of those buffets coming back either. I think they've decided we have to strip out the least profitable pieces of the business and remain as profitable as we can. And so some of those labor-intensive loss leaders in hotel casinos, those positions just aren't likely to come back. We don't see them returning anytime soon. And so what you see on that curve, you start to see it's flattening out a bit in the last few months. So we're just not seeing the lift or the demand within the leisure and hospitality sector like we would hope to see. Obviously, they're not back to full occupancy as of yet, but nonetheless, we're not going to see all of those jobs come back anytime soon. So we're going to see a little bit of a slowdown. So I think one of the points I want to make here is that we're down over 60,000 jobs here, but somehow people can't find people to fill jobs. It's like, what happened, right? So this is this unique dynamic that I've sort of been struggling with over the last 18, 22 months, whatever it is since this thing started, how can we be short on employees yet there's all these people not working? So what exactly happened? So this is my way to try, a long way of trying to explain this, but there's a couple of key data points. The quit rates and the hire rates, left and right, probably should have been next to each other now that I think about it, but you get the idea. We hit this record high. We had nation-leading quit rates in May of 2021. More people had quit their jobs on a relative basis in percentage terms than anywhere in the country. It was right here in the state of Nevada, and so we had all these people quitting at this record-setting pace, but we were also hiring at a record-setting pace on the far right. And you get the idea. People that were dealing in the service industry, relatively low-wage earners, they're sitting there dealing with customers every day, right? And there's a lot of angry customers out there in the world, right? They just, COVID-19, I think, made people nuts. And so you had all these folks that started jumping from job to job really quickly. They could get $1 more, $2 more an hour. They were jumping between locations. Maybe they work in a restaurant, they work at a hotel. So you had this really high turnover rate because they knew employers needed workers. And so you had this big, fast pace of turnover. We were hiring pretty strong, but in the middle, now we saw the huge layoffs, and now where we're at today. So employers, if they have a good quality worker, they're hanging on to them because it's really tough to find good workers today. And again, it's over 60,000 people that we've lost in the leisure and hospitality industry. And where are we seeing the highest quit rates? Hotels, restaurants, retail, those sorts of things. Those are the areas where people are sort of jumping around quickly. These are national data. But if you think about it, this is really the core of our economy. These are the areas that we're really good at. This is where we have a high concentration of our employees, and so we're seeing a lot of turnover there. This also demonstrates how many job openings there are. We have over 100,000 job openings in the state of Nevada right now. So employers are looking to fill 100,000 positions. Well, where are they? I don't know where they are. I mean, it's across the board.
Why aren't they?
Because there's nobody that wants to work. I think that's why. Well, I'm going to tell you why. You're setting me up. I'm getting there. I promise you. We actually have almost 40,000 more jobs than openings than we did pre-pandemic. So we always have job openings. So I don't want to scare you, but we do have 40,000 more than we did pre-pandemic. And you have all these major hotel casino companies. They are actually hiring. They have 3,200 job postings, some multiple jobs for each posting. So you get the idea. They're out there looking. They're having a tough time too, but they're not bringing back all those jobs. And we look at the number of people that are unemployed relative to the number of openings there are. Far right, it's still pretty tight in terms of the labor market compared to pre-pandemic. It's a pretty tight job market out there. All of this is leading to, at this point, I think that helps answer your question, Bobby, is the fact that we had about 65% of the folks that were eligible to work in the market were participating in the labor market. Labor force participation rate, this is like the geeky stuff that we do. But that's a pretty good number pre-pandemic. 65% of folks were participating in the job market. COVID-19 hits, and where are we at now? Almost 60%, 61% of folks are now participating in the labor market. So we lost 5 percentage points. 5 points. It doesn't seem like a whole lot, right? It's not a big number. 5 percentage points equates to about 75,000 people that are no longer in the job market. They're not looking for work, they're not working, they're not participating in the job market, they've just exited the deal altogether. And so it's like, where did all these people go, right? And so it's brought our unemployment rate down, our reported unemployment rate down to about 5%. But if you add those folks back in, it's really probably about double that. So about double that is the overall unemployment rate, approaching 10% here in Southern Nevada, but the reported number is more like 5%. And then you look at sort of the labor force participation by age group. And so you see on there the one category at the bottom, the sort of darker of the darker colors. I don't know how else to explain that. The one that's the lowest on the right of the chart, that is your 55 and over age demographic. So older folks have been much slower to return to the job market. That's the point of this slide. So I get back to sort of where I started and where did they go? Where did they all go? This is where they went. They're out on the golf course, they're traveling, right? They're sitting on the couch watching Jeopardy. Whatever old people do when they retire, that's, I guess, what happens. They're out not participating in the labor market, and so they've left the market. And how is it that people, I guess what has happened in terms of all of those folks that have not come back to the job market? So these are the reasons that people in Nevada have said over time why they have not gone back to work. And so there's people that they're caring for a family member, they're watching their kids. One of the wage earners in the house has decided to stay home and watch the kids while they're not going to school or whatever. And they've just decided they're going to get by with one income as opposed to two. Bless you. Maybe they don't want to pay for childcare, so they're going to take care of the kids. You get the idea. Maybe their employer went out of business. Who knows? But retirees, look, this is the only line on the chart that's increasing. So a larger and larger share of people that aren't going back to work have said they've retired. They've simply they hung it up. They're done. They stopped working. Bless you. So this is really what's driving this unusual environment in the job market right now. The fact that we have a lot of people that retired, and we look at the wealth that everybody has generated over the last 2 years. And again, this is now by age category. You see those people in that 55 plus, 55 to 69 age category have benefited the most from what we've seen in terms of the stock market over the last couple of years, what we've seen in terms of home prices going up over the last couple of years. It's added about $10 trillion worth of wealth for that specific age group. So you have folks that were maybe approaching retirement age, they feel a lot better. They've got a high balance sheet, they've got assets now. They've just simply decided to retire and they've exited the job market. So you get the idea. It's really pulled people away from the working, the mix of workers, if you will. So tourism, I mentioned this at the outset, really important to Las Vegas. A third of the overall economy here on any typical year. Obviously the last 2 years have been atypical, but you get the idea. And here's why we've been doing pretty well. I don't know if any of you have gone down to the Strip or have friends coming in town, right? We've got all these special events. Leisure travelers coming for special events to Las Vegas has been driving everything we've been seeing on the Strip, whether it's professional sports or concerts. My favorite is the bottom right. Don't know if anybody went to the WWE SummerSlam. No, I don't get it, but 65,000 people did. They came to Las Vegas and went to this wrestling thing at Allegiant Stadium. It's pretty crazy and impressive in terms of how many people are coming into town for major events. So Allegiant Stadium is doing exactly what it was supposed to do. This is why it was built. There were 3 reasons. 1 was to bring an NFL team. 2 was to have a great facility for our UNLV football team. UNLV football team, yeah. Still working on that one. Number 3 was to have these events that we could not have had otherwise. Without a 65,000 seat venue, we couldn't bring in major events. We cannot bring in these stadium tours and things that come to those types of buildings. We just didn't have the infrastructure for it. So long story short, it's doing exactly what we wanted it to do. If you go to a Raiders game and there's like this annoying Denver Broncos fan right next to you and he's screaming for his team and you're screaming back and there's fights breaking out, whatever goes on, right? That's perfectly acceptable, but when you walk out of that building, you pat that guy on the back and you're like, hey, thanks for coming to Vegas. These guys are spending a lot of money when they come here. They buy this expensive football ticket, then they realize they got to rent a hotel room, and they go online and like, oh my God, what happened to room rates in Vegas, right? They're dumping a ton of money at the hotels. They're spending money like crazy on gaming activities. This has really helped boost and stabilize the tourism industry during this whole pandemic time frame. And so this gives you the month-by-month visitor volume. So you see prior to March of 2020, what it looked like, and now you see what it's been happening, this recovery curve that I'm talking about. We're seeing things come back a little bit quicker than I think most had expected. We're seeing a lot of visitors come into Las Vegas. Yes, we're still off 10, 20%, somewhere in that range, but we are seeing a lot of people come back to Las Vegas. And remember, I think it's important to think about this. Convention travelers typically account for about 16% of all the visitors in Las Vegas. We don't have very many convention travelers coming in right now, very few. We also have about 14% of all the visitors are from international destinations. So you put those 2 pieces together, we don't have international travelers coming back in any big numbers, you put those 2 together, that's 30% of our typical visitation. So we have all these leisure travelers, people going to special events, concerts, and they're just coming out to have fun. They're filling the gap right now, and so they're helping pay the bills in the resort industry. And how are they helping to pay the bills? Here's gaming revenue. I don't know about you guys, but take a look. On the Strip, at an all-time high in terms of gaming revenue. Downtown, we built this place called Circa Las Vegas that's being filled up by out-of-towners as well as locals. And then on the locals market, your Red Rock Resorts of the world, Suncoast, all of those types of casinos. Look at how much people are spending in the last year. The highest bar on that entire chart on the far right. So local casino operators are also benefiting from what's happening here from consumers in the market. So people are literally spending money like drunken sailors, and they're benefiting from all of that. So it's really helped stabilize what they've been dealing with in terms of the challenges. And then we're making a lot of investments too in our local infrastructure, including the tourism industry. We're tracking about $22 billion worth of major investments here in Southern Nevada alone. And you get the idea. A lot of tourism-related projects, a lot of non-tourism, and some infrastructure. Just so you know, when you guys are all going into your single sign-on system through LasVegasRealtor.com, and you go in there, and what you guys all do is you go in that upper left little tile that says Matrix, right? You're like, what is all this other stuff? I don't care. I gotta sell houses. I go to this top left little box. Boom, hit it. You're in the MLS, right? About, I don't know, 9 boxes or 12 boxes over, there's this little thing called LVR data. So we built a website for Las Vegas Realtors for all of you. They have us maintain this website. You go through there, you click through, single sign on, that whole technology thing works, and you're in, right? You're into this website that we built. There's a map in there if you might want to check it out, an interactive map. You can pull up all $22 billion worth of those projects, tinker around, click on them. You know, tell your clients how smart you are, and you know, this project was this, and this is when it's supposed to be completed, and here's how much it cost, and send them a pretty picture and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, that's all there for you. That's my internal LVR plug. This is how those projects are broken down. Under construction activity, planned activity, you get the idea. There's a lot of investments being made here. Anybody remember this project? This is my favorite one. 15 years that project stood like that. 15 years it didn't move, and now we've got a fancy logo on the front. It's happening. They're putting money into this thing, so we'll see that come into the market. That's like 3,700 hotel rooms, by the way. The MSG Sphere, this is the giant ball that's going to be behind Venetian and Palazzo, 17,500 seats, state-of-the-art sort of venue. All LED boards on the outside when this thing is done. You guys will get the idea. We have non-tourism related projects like Haas Automation. They're building a manufacturing plant in Henderson. They've invested about $100 million out there. Our medical building in downtown that's underway, that's what it looks like today. A lot of important things happening there. How about the Dollar Loan Center in Henderson? The DLC, right? I don't know. We're gonna go watch some minor league hockey there, the Henderson Knights. We're gonna watch some indoor football league activity there. They're going to be bringing in folks for concerts and other sorts of events in that venue in Henderson. Many of you are probably familiar with Summerlin outside the Las Vegas ballpark, an office tower going up there. Recently, the Mirage just sold to the Seminole tribe that operates the Hard Rock International brand. They're going to build, yes, that guitar is actually a hotel tower. They're going to build a hotel shaped like a guitar. They've done it before too, so it's supposed to happen. So that'll be a fun one. They paid over $1 billion for the Mirage Hotel Casino to do that. Then you have some plans for other projects like Majestic over by the Convention Center. You've got this property called Dream Hotel on the South Strip that's being planned. There's all sorts of stuff happening. So let's get to really why you're here, right? The housing market. Anybody care about the housing market? Is it important for any reason? I don't know. All right, well then we'll start with this one, because this is what everybody asks me. When does the music stop? It's been really fun, right, in the housing market? It's been great. How long can this continue? So let me walk you through kind of the thought process here from our perspective in terms of what we're seeing in the housing market. And when every time we think about where the market's headed, we always want to focus on the fundamentals of the housing market and the fundamentals of the economy. And so this is how I like to think about it. And if I were you, I'd talk to my clients this way when they're asking, like, is it a good time to sell? Is it not? You know, when's this thing going to crash? All that sort of stuff, right? At the end of the day, people occupy houses, right? I know this sounds very basic and you all get this, but the reality is we are one of the fastest growing communities in the country, and we are continuing to see positive population growth. So more people means more demand for more housing units. So that's sort of a basic element of how this whole equation works, at least in my mind. we keep having people move here. I know sometimes we don't want to see all of these Californians on our roadways, but let me tell you, they're buying a lot of houses and spending a lot of money, right? So those are sort of annual data, and if we look more recent in terms of what we're seeing, how do we track how many people are actually moving here, we look at a couple of things. One of them is driver's license surrenders. So somebody comes from out of town, they take their driver's license to the DMV, they exchange it. Yes, sir? Go back one slide. Yes, we have 2.4 million people in the Las Vegas area, and we are going to be well above that as we get sort of out a few years. 3 million folks by 2035, and you see we're going to be adding a lot of housing units, a couple 100,000 over the next decade or so. But what we do is we track, how many people are coming through those DMVs. They get their in-state driver's license, and we had over 75,000 people exchange their out-of-state driver's licenses last year. And the other thing we like to look at is how many homes are connected to the power grid. We're turning on more power for more homes. You assume somebody's living in there. I know you have vacant listings and the power's still on, but we track that over time. That works itself out. But nonetheless, you get the idea. We're adding more houses to the power grid. That means we're bringing more inventory to the market. There are more people moving in to Southern Nevada. Any idea where they come from? Yeah, no surprises, right? California. 2 out of 5 folks are coming from California. This is the highest rate we've seen in terms of the migration from California relative to other states. And so we're seeing a lot of people leave California. Last year was the first time they lost population, so pretty important. And here's how the Vegas Valley sort of builds out, right? On average, we have about 2.78 people per house. I feel really bad for that third guy. The 0.8 guy. I guess we could have taken his feet off instead or something like that, I don't know. But we take that growth that we're seeing, about 2% growth in population. We convert that to houses. It's about, we got 50,000 plus new people. We got to convert into about 19,000 housing units here in Southern Nevada that we need for the year, okay? This is why I think this is important, thinking about the fundamentals, what makes sense in the housing market. So we need 19,000 housing units, and look at how the market's built out historically and where we're at. Probably gonna have about 20% of those units will be apartments. Multifamily rentals, so it's at about 4,000 units. You got another 15,000 for sale units that we need. Single family, could be condos, could be townhouses, but we need about 15,000 for sale units in the Las Vegas Valley in the next year, assuming that population growth continues like it has been. And then we look at how many units have been permitted for construction in Las Vegas. It sort of feels like people are suggesting maybe we're overbuilding, right? We're building too many new homes. Lee says, no way, no how. We are not overbuilding, and he's right. Because look, in the last 12 months, we only permitted 14,000 houses. Well, I'm telling you, we need somewhere about 15,000. We're in pretty good balance in terms of how many units we're bringing to the market and how many units we ultimately need to fill and sell. And so you get the idea. This is my point, that we are fairly balanced in terms of population growth relative to the number of housing units that we're building. And let me tell you, there's nothing to choose from. Well, you tell me, there's nothing to choose from if you're looking for something in the market today, right? And so what's been driving a lot of the demand is how much consumers have been able to purchase. Mortgage rates have been low, really low. We've seen them tick up a little bit in the last 30 days or so, and they'll probably continue to tick up a little bit. I think we're okay. Rates will probably go, maybe they start approaching 4%, maybe, something like that over the next several months, into the later part of the year. As long as rates don't get out of control and we start to see these, 6%, 7%, 8% interest rates, I think consumers will still be able to afford, it's probably not the right word, be willing to pay, or what they could pay relative to what the market is. And so we're seeing, consumers willing to put out what they are willing to do, given the sort of cost of borrowing. Sort of the point here. These are the LVR data. Median single-family home prices and condos and townhouses were up over 20% year over year. This is where I get really worried. We cannot continue to see prices increase 20% on top of 20% on top of 20% year over year. Just can't continue, right? We kind of know how that played out last time. It wasn't really good. Fortunately for us, we've got folks with a lot more equity in their homes and real cash in their homes, and we're in a much better, I think, position from a fundamental standpoint than we were last cycle, so I don't expect to see prices dumping by 50% like we once did. And then we take a look at what's, in terms of the number of sales, we turned over nearly 50,000 homes last year. somehow there was nothing to choose from, but we still sold 50,000 houses. Mind-boggling. It meant you guys were working your tails off is what it meant, because those things were turning over so quickly. On the average, I don't know, about 14 days or so on average across the market. It was just a phenomenal pace of growth, and so good for you guys that we were able to sell that many units. I don't know we'll be able to repeat that performance this year though, right? My concern is that we had a lot of people sitting at home during COVID-19. You had your kids sitting in one room going to school, you were working in another room, your spouse is working out in another room. Next thing you know, you're like, hey, you know what, I hate this house, let's get a bigger house. We need a nicer house, we need more space, whatever it was. So I think we pulled a lot of demand forward. We had people that were maybe planning, yeah, we'll move in 2, 3 years, 4 years, we'll buy a new house. But I think COVID-19 had people rethinking everything, right? They weren't spending as much money necessarily because they weren't going out and doing the things they normally do. They sort of pulled this demand forward. They maybe bought a house sooner than they did. I think we have a lot of people now that are kind of anchored in their house. They're going to stay there for a little while, so we might not have as much churn in the market that in the next few years relative to what we would have had otherwise. I don't know about you guys, or everybody that owns a house in here. If you had to go buy your house today at what it's worth, my guess is that you couldn't, right? Home prices are up that much. So yeah, it's great. Hey, I got another 100 grand in equity in my house, but what is it that exactly I'm going to go buy? I mean, there's not an alternative out there, right, that you can necessarily afford. And so I think we could see a little bit of a slowdown in terms of sales volumes potentially. This is the supply side of the equation that's been helping to boost prices. I don't need to tell you about this very much other than sorry you don't have any listings and sorry you can't find anything for your buyers. This is where we're at from an effective months of inventory, less than 1 month. Again, it's just churning really quickly. This is my point about negative equity. During the last cycle, we had about 7 out of 10 folks were underwater. They owed more on their house than it was worth, and a lot of people just bailed, right? They gave up and they got out. Now there's essentially no negative equity in the market. And for the 1.1% of folks that are upside down on their mortgage, I'm not quite sure how that happened actually. If you think about what that market's at, right? Prices just went up 20% year over year, but somehow they're still upside down. I'm guessing they just leveraged up too much. Mortgage defaults, we saw those start to come back as COVID-19 hit, but we're really settling down on that particular metric, so not a lot of distress in the market. New home construction, land, labor, and materials. You hear from the home builders all day long. Land prices are through the roof. Labor costs are high. Construction wages are high. Material costs, you hear about lumber, you hear about paint, you hear about baseboards. People can't get drywall in. I mean, there's some crazy stuff. Talking to a builder last week, they're closing homes with temporary garages, garage doors. The actual garage, but the door that keeps the place safe, right? They're putting in a temporary garage door and waiting for the garage door that was designed for the house to come in, and they're like 6 months out. But buyers are willing to close on these units because they have to. They have to live somewhere. And so a lot of this craziness, I'm sure you're dealing with your clients, temporary appliances until the real deal comes in, or some makeshift air conditioning unit or whatever it is. A lot of crazy stuff going on these days, but it's all sort of passing the sniff test, I guess. Land prices. So what you have here on the left are the average price per acre of all land transactions in Las Vegas by year. And so you see the average is approaching like $600,000 an acre. Yeah, steep, right? That includes residential and non-residential. So right now you have home builders that are paying, some of them upwards of $1 million an acre and some of them more than $1 million an acre. And sometimes what you might not learn about is the fact that some major master plan communities also have a, what's the right word? Not kickback, but a profit participation arrangement with the buyer, right? When they actually buy the land and they build homes and they sell homes, portion of that sales price of the home goes back to the land seller, and so some of that goes on. So really what builders are paying is a big premium on land. I guess that's the point. The other point is you see that the data for land prices are trending with home prices, at least historically. So the ups and downs in the land market align pretty well with the ups and downs in the housing market. New home prices, resale prices, you get the idea. That's a big component of what goes into a house, and so it's also the ebbs and flows of the economy, but they are pretty correlated in terms of land pricing. And this is really where the concern is, right? The housing affordability, housing opportunity index, same thing. overall affordability is going down. So about 42% of folks have the ability to afford the median home price here in Southern Nevada. This is going to become a bigger challenge. This is going to become a bigger problem. Fortunately, we have a lot of folks coming in from California that are averting this whole situation because they're bringing a ton of wealth and equity with them. But nonetheless, housing affordability for locals here in the market is going to be an increasingly greater challenge. We'll see how local government leaders deal with that, but this is certainly a challenge that everybody's going to be facing, and we'll see how this plays out over the next couple of years. So we're becoming a big city, I think, is really part of what the point here is, and we're doing a lot of great things to bring people into the market, and we're seeing upward pressure on wages. We're trying to diversify the economy. We're trying to do all of those things, but we do have some headwinds, supply chain, inflation, and those sorts of things. So I guess the overall conclusion here is that we're in a pretty stable environment in the big picture, considering this pandemic that we're coming off of. I like where we're at from a population standpoint, from a demand for housing standpoint. I think we will continue to see some stability in home prices. I don't think we want to see the 20% price increases like we've been experiencing, although it's great for all of us that own homes. It gets to be a little bit tricky in terms of how long that is sustainable for. So look, I think we'll see some positive price appreciation continue, at least in the next several months and potentially through the end of the year. And I think that's a positive as opposed to a negative, which could be the alternative. So that's what I have. I see some questions, some hands. What can I answer?
You had a really good slide that you had last time, and I hope you'll bring it back when you come to us in March. The one about large investors, their percentage of ownership.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, sorry I don't have that for you today. Yeah, we took a look at, there's a lot of talk about, there's going to be a lot of divestitures. Are we going to see these groups that own a lot of homes? Are they going to unload this stuff and dump it onto the market? That is, a valid concern. So we went through all the assessor data files and said, who owns all these houses? There's not that many large blocks of owners of these properties, and so that gives me a little bit of encouragement that we're not going to see a bunch of homes dumped on the market. A lot of them are these outfits that own and operate them as rentals, and so they've got tenants in them. And I always say at the end of the day, whether it's an owner occupied or it's renter occupied, somebody's filling that house. So if that person or that family doesn't leave the Las Vegas area, they've got to live somewhere, and that continues to provide stability in the housing market. Even if they do decide to sell it, they're going to move across the street to another rental, and somebody's going to move out of a rental and go buy the house. Sort of keeps the whole dynamic in balance, at least as best it can. So yeah, that's a great point in terms of the ownership of units in Las Vegas. Yes, sir.
Are you able to share with us the?
No. Yes, I will get this over to you. Michelle, you want to get it to the group? You guys sharing all that kind of stuff? Yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we'll get it out to you. Of course. Yeah. Thank
Just
you.
on the last point, they are also aware that they own all these homes and they want to keep their profits high too. So.
Yes, the big property owners. I think they learned the lesson last time, right? Everybody saw the prices sort of peaking, and they're like, let's realize our profits and sell these units. Next thing you know, you had 30,000 units on the market, and it hurt every one of them because prices started dumping. Now, the economy was a disaster at that time too, but yes, I think they learned a painful lesson what happens when there's too much supply on the market. Absolutely. Go ahead.
I think you talked about the workers, but then I think we kind of skipped over. I mean, I come from a food and beverage background, and a lot of my friends still work for food and beverage, and I think part of it is there was some new owners, particularly in Caesars, right before COVID happened. And, I came from a gourmet background where, you have a server, you have a back waiter, you have a busser. They're sharing back waiters, they're sharing bussers. They're not opening up jobs that normally, and they're like forcing people to do double the work. Then you see all these openings. They laid off thousands of people because they didn't get vaccinated. I know a lot of people that got laid off because they didn't get vaccinated. And then the workload that put on HR, even if they have these job openings, these people are having to do 6-7 times the workload. So they're not even though there's openings, they're not filling them because they don't have the people to process them. So I think that's a huge part. And then people sold because they thought the world was going to fall, and they're living off that money. So I think there's a lot more to that than what's in here.
Yeah, no, look, I hear you. I think there's a lot of craziness going on in the job market as it relates to how people are finding work, how businesses are operating. Yeah, there is certainly a
But they
unique.
don't want it. Like, they were used to a certain pay, and they just don't find it. Like, they don't want it. I don't know, it's amazing to me when people don't show up for interviews.
Yeah, no, I think people lost their minds during COVID-19, I swear. Look, we look for people, we interview people, and I told a buddy this just the other day. I meet with a son of a friend of mine that's just graduated with an economics degree, and the first thing, I said, hey, how's it going? We sit down and we talk, and he says, great, so what is it you think you want to do? What is your career path? What do you think? And he says, well, I got a buddy just graduated. He went to San Francisco. He got a $150,000 job, and he doesn't really even have to work. It's like, awesome. I think I might start looking in San Francisco. Well, that was the end of the interview, but I think people have just changed their mind in terms of how they want to live their lives, and I don't know that everybody's willing to